What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is Lazy Daze Tubby, and I'm back at it again on my solo channel, doing some more history reaction for you guys today. And it is some more WarHawks content for you, and it is their series, the American Civil War, all parts. And we have Fight for Henry Hill Part 3. I'm really looking forward to finding out what they've got in store for me today. Kings and Generals, WarHawk makes amazing content and tell an amazing story. Their battle maps are absolutely impeccable. If you haven't already, head over to their page, links in the description box down below. If you guys are enjoying my reaction, looking forward to future reactions, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But we are jumping straight into this one. Our brave men fell in great numbers.
On the far side of Henry House Hill, the remnants of Evans, Bees, and Bartow's brigades take refuge. Their ranks are completely shattered. However, they have bought time for reinforcements to arrive, and now fresh troops start coming forward. First to arrive is Colonel Wade Hampton and the infantry of the South Carolina Legion, a unit with infantry, cavalry, and artillery all in one. He goes into line on the right of the Confederate front, his men still panting from having just arrived on a train from Richmond and then run to the front, and from the Warrenton Turnpike to cover the withdrawal of the Confederates across Young's Branch. At 11:45, the Federals on Matthews Hill begin sweeping through the remnants of Bees, Bartow's, and Evans brigades. Colonel Hunter's adjutant, Lieutenant Averill,
I really like the date and the time that WarHawk puts in these videos. It really sort of just gives you a good aspect of the time ratio of what's going on.
begins assuming control over troop movements for the division, while Colonel Burnside leads from the field. As the rebels stream further south towards the Henry House, Averill orders forward a single regiment from Porter's brigade in pursuit, the 27th New York under Colonel Henry W. Slocum. The New Yorkers advance down to the Warrenton-Sudley intersection and easily push back the Shanken remnants of the 4th Alabama from the road in the stone house. Soldiers of the 4th Alabama, now completely broken, rush behind the safety of Imboden's cannons, which are continuing to pour shot and shell into the Federal advance. Their shell fire harasses the New Yorkers of the 27th as they attempt to move up the pike. At the same time, Hampton's Legion is moving up on the Confederate right flank to reinforce the 7th Georgia from Bartow's 2nd Brigade, positioned behind the Warrenton Turnpike after having been left in reserve and kept relatively intact from the earlier fight on Matthews Hill. Hampton's Legion deploys behind cover in a fence farm lane in front of the Robinson House, aptly known as the Robinson Lane. As the 27th New York clears the Warrenton Turnpike and begins moving up the slopes of the Henry House Hill, it comes under fire from Hampton's Legion posted along the Robinson Lane. The New Yorkers quickly wheel to the right to engage the Hampton Legion on the east side of the hill. While the 27th New York advances in line of battle up the Henry House Hill towards Robinson Lane, the 7th Georgia advances to the left flank of the Hampton Legion in support of those troops. The 7th Georgia has a perfect field of fire against the 27th New York. However, the Federal Regiment does not wheel to engage this new threat, as the Georgians are wearing blue uniforms, causing the officers of the 27th New York to mistaken them for friendly forces moving up in support. The 7th Georgia soldiers level their muskets as the rebel flag unfurls in the windless air, revealing the New Yorkers' fatal mistake. The Georgians fire a concentrated volley into the 27th New York, wounding Colonel Slocum in the galling fire. Seeing the 27th New York coming under heavy fire and taking losses at an alarming rate, Lieutenant Averill sends the 14th New York State Militia, soon known by the colorful Zouave nickname of the 14th Brooklyn Chasseurs, and the gray uniformed 8th New York State Militia to their sister regiment's support. However, the New Yorkers come under a hail of musketry from both the Hampton Legion in Robinson Lane and the 7th Georgia to the Union right flank. Soon after several minutes of exchanging fire, both sides fall back to a safe distance. The 8th New York is soon worn down and battered from the firefight, that they will not reform or engage further for the rest of the battle. Around 12:15 to 12:30 p.m., more Confederate reinforcements begin to arrive on the southern slopes of Henry House Hill in the form of Brigadier General Thomas Jonathan Jackson's 1st Virginia Brigade, part of Johnston's Army of the Shenandoah. General Jackson, a former artillery instructor at the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, who is still dressed in his blue U.S. Army uniform, had his men up at 4 o'clock that morning, expecting to go reinforce James Longstreet at Blackburn's Ford. But then later in the morning, he heard the firing off to his left at the Stone Bridge. Like being Bartow before him, he did not wait for orders, but assuming the battle to be there, he instantly put his brigade in motion. By about 12:30, he approached the scene of action and moved up the back slope of Henry House Hill. Once on the crest of the hill, he puts his 5 Virginia infantry regiments in line just beyond the summit, informs General B of his arrival, and tells his men to lie down and await either the attack of the enemy or further instructions from Brigadier General Joseph E. Johnston.
Okay.
Captain Bowden withdraws his 4 guns from the northern slopes of the hill to Jackson's position, where the artillery officer informs Jackson he has only 3 rounds of ammunition left in his limber chest and would soon fall back. Jackson instead orders Bowden to remain on the hill with him, as he believes he needs to demonstrate strength in order to hopefully discourage the Union forces long enough for his brigade to fully deploy on the hill. Captain Bowden and his battery hold firm with Jackson's line, with only 3 rounds of ammunition left for their 4 6-pounders. Just after 12:30, Brigadier Generals Beauregard and Johnston ride into the scene on Henry House Hill with additional artillery batteries, allowing Captain Bowden to finally pull back and rest. General
It's only 12:35 p.m. I'm really liking this time.
Johnston rallies the retreating 4th Alabama by taking the regimental battle flag and repositions them near Jackson's defensive line while under heavy fire. Meanwhile, Beauregard rallies the tired and shattered 8th Georgia. General Beauregard agrees with General Johnston that he will remain on the hill to rally the shattered Confederate forces there, while Johnston would organize a redeployment of the other brigades along Bull Run and move them up to the hill to reinforce Jackson's thin line. Beauregard begins riding across the southern end of the hill, gathering and rallying the remnants of B's, Bartow's, and Evans' brigades to support Jackson's men. Brigadier General Jackson sets up his 13 artillery guns from various batteries on the reverse slope of Henry House Hill. In this position, when the guns fire, they would roll back down the slope from the recoil, where they would be safely reloaded before being pushed back up and fired again.
That's a really interesting tactic.
12:45 onwards, the Union begins to attack Henry Hill in a peaceful and disorganized fashion. Colonel Keyes and Tyler's 1st Division, impatiently waiting for the 1st and 2nd Connecticut of his 1st Brigade to form into line, finally orders his other 2 regiments already deployed, the 2nd Maine and 3rd Connecticut, to advance up the eastern slope of the hill, past the Robinson House and its farm lane, to attack Jackson on his weaker right flank. The sheer force of the advance by the 2nd Maine and 3rd Connecticut takes the Hampton Legion, 7th Georgia, and 5th Virginia by surprise and stuns them, pushing them back about 100 yards from the Robinson Lane. However, the Virginians are not yet routed. The 5th Virginia quickly rallies and launches a counterattack despite the retreat of Hampton's men in the 7th Georgia. The ferocious countercharge by the 5th Virginia devastates the ranks of the 2nd Maine and 3rd Connecticut, forcing the New Englanders to fall back to their original positions beyond the Warrenton Turnpike. For the moment, Jackson's right flank is stabilized.
For God's sake, boys, save my battery. Interesting.
Worried that his flanks could be turned in a Union double envelopment, Jackson requests Lieutenant Colonel James Ewell Brown Stewart, or Jeb Stewart, to divide the 300 men from his 1st Virginia Cavalry Regiment into 2 squadrons, and place them on the flanks of Jackson's force, 150 men per side. At 1 p.m., The Federals follow up their attack on Henry House Hill with another one, this time by the U.S. Marine Corps Battalion of 4 companies, the 1st Fire Zouaves of the 11th New York, and the red-shirted troops of the 1st Minnesota.
Okay.
These infantry units support the advance of Captain James B. Ricketts' Company I, 1st U.S. Artillery, up Henry Hill to attack Jackson's left flank. As the Union guns unlimber on the slopes of the hill, Confederate sharpshooters hiding in the Henry House begin to pick off men from Ricketts' battery, causing several artillerymen to fall. Ricketts orders the leftmost gun of his battery to be turned towards the house and has it fire a shell through the building, sending the rebel sharpshooters scrambling away for their safety of their lines.
Holy.
The single solid-shot round crashes through the house's bedroom window, flies through the bedroom, and blows off the feet of the bedridden 85-year-old widow Miss Judith Carter Henry before bursting in the living room. Miss Henry
She was still in the house.
is badly wounded from the shell and will die from her wounds later that night, becoming the Civil War's first civilian casualty. Miss Henry's eldest daughter, Ellen Henry, living with her mother and a hired teenage slave named Lucy Griffith, hides in the house's brick chimney, where she will become permanently deaf from the ear-piercing reverberations caused by the artillery fire. Captain Charles Griffin's Company D, 5th U.S. Artillery, joins Ricketts' battery and unlimbers on the left side of the Henry House at about 1:15 p.m. However, the Union artillery's position on the slope of the hill, where they are unable to see the enemy artillery batteries on the opposite side of the field. Their long-range rifled shells do little damage to the Confederates, who are close to their position at a distance of about 300 yards. Confederate artillery pieces from Jackson's 13-gun battery atop Henry House Hill actually hold the advantage over the rifled Federal guns. Due to their cannon being sumo bores, their short-range fire is more accurate than the longer-range Union cannons.
If the Union cannons are such a longer range, why are they so close? Is it because the Confederates' cannons are on the hill and they keep rolling down, so they need to be this close to possibly get a sight and a line of sight and actually be able to shoot them? That'd be interesting.
Whose rounds arch over the rebel guns and infantry. Jackson's tactic of deploying his batteries on the reverse slope of the hill works, and the gunners can safely reload their pieces before rolling them back up to fire once more. At the same time as the artillery duel is ensuing on Henry Hill, civilians from Washington, D.C., mostly politicians, dignitaries, government officials, and their wives and families, arrive on the battlefield either on foot or in their horse-drawn buggies and carriages to watch what they believe will be a decisive Federal victory over the rebels. Many even bring picnic baskets and blankets to enjoy a Sunday picnic lunch while they watch the battle. Some Southerners, mainly local residents or nearby politicians, also gather on the opposite side of the field to watch their Confederate soldiers win the day. About 1:45 p.m., the 1st Minnesota and 11th New York, supporting the Federal right flank of Ricketts' battery, comes into contact with the blue uniformed soldiers of the 33rd Virginia. The 33rd delivers a devastating series of volleys into the Federal troops, raking the enemy lines with musketry in the firefight. The 1st Minnesota's commander, Colonel Willis A. Gorman, splits his regiment into 2 groups, with Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Miller in charge of companies A and F posted closer to the far right flank of the guns near the tree line along the road, while Colonel Gorman leads the rest of the Minnesotans on the opposite side of Ricketts' battery closer to the Henry House.
Interesting.
At the same time, Major John G. Reynolds' U.S. Marine Corps Battalion, supporting Griffin's battery, begins exchanging volleys with the 4th and 27th Virginia across Henry House Hill. These Marines are not the hardened warriors who stormed the halls of Montezuma or the shores of Tripoli. They are raw, inexperienced recruits with just a few weeks of training, and they quickly begin to waver under such heavy fire. The Virginians manage to advance within 70 yards before loosing their volleys. After sustaining heavy casualties from the combined volley fire of the 4th and 27th Virginia, around 1:45 p.m., the Marine Corps Battalion begins to rout off the hill. leaving Griffin's battery exposed without infantry support. During the artillery duel on Henry House Hill, First Lieutenant Adelbert Ames, commanding the first section of Griffin's battery, distinguishes himself by courageously leading his artillery pieces under heavy fire, encouraging his men during the heated cannonade, while personally directing the fire of one of his 10-pounder Parrott rifles. Lieutenant Ames is severely wounded. However, the 26-year-old first lieutenant refuses to leave the field or his men until he's finally carried off the hill after he's too weak to sit upon the caisson which he had been placed on by the men of his command. Adelbert Ames' actions would later earn him the Congressional Medal of Honor. Close to 1:45, as the fire zouaves and the Minnesotans come under heavy fire from the 33rd Virginia, they too begin to flee from the hill and the support of Ricketts' battery. Seeing the enemy's wavering lines, Lieutenant Colonel Jeb Stewart's troopers from the 1st Virginia Cavalry launch a saber charge after them, only adding to the confusion of the Union rout from the hill. Around 2 to 2:15 p.m., both sides begin to receive much-needed reinforcements. Artillery and small arms fire have killed most of the horses in Ricketts' battery, and his men are unable to retreat.
Okay, yeah.
Horses are not the only casualties mounting in the battery's ranks either. Ricketts' artillerymen are also suffering high casualties, so much so that the infantry remnants from the routed 11th New York and 1st Minnesota have to assist a captain in manning his guns. Ricketts' second in command, First Lieutenant Douglas Ramsey, falls dead from a rebel artillery shell. Second Lieutenant Edmund Kirby, leading the battery's second section, assumes the role of senior lieutenant in the battery. Captain Ricketts dashes among the retreating foot soldiers, beseeching them, "For God's sake, boys, save my battery!" he calls out. Some of the New Yorkers within earshot, and knots of men from the 1st Minnesota, mainly soldiers from Company A, led by Captain Alexander Wilkin, and Company F, under Captain William J. Covell, return to defend their exposed artillery pieces. Second Lieutenant
boys.
William H. Elderkin, the 3rd Section commander in Ricketts' battery, attempts to conduct the remaining limbers and caissons to the rear as the battery continues to lose men and horses at an alarming rate. Around 2:30, Captain Ricketts himself falls wounded, leading the gun crew of one of his 10-pounder Parrott rifles. Ricketts falls to the ground, resting beside the wheel of the cannon. He watches helplessly as his remaining gun crew are either cut down by cannon or rifle fire, or they flee down the hill. He will later be captured after the battle. Meanwhile, Captain Griffin, in an audacious, daring move, detaches 2 of his guns, both 6-pounder field howitzers, from 2nd Lieutenant Charles F. Hazlett's 2nd Section, and sends them to Ricketts' right flank with the intention of shelling down the line of the 33rd Virginia. The 33rd Virginia's commander, Colonel Arthur C. Cummings, spots 2 guns moving toward his position and knows that his men cannot withstand artillery fire from point-blank range. The colonel orders his men to fix bayonets and prepare to charge. Captain Griffin and Lieutenant Hazlett order the gunners to prepare canister rounds. Just then, however, McDowell's chief of artillery, Major William F. Berry, rides up to the 2 guns and orders them to hold fire, as he believes the blue uniformed men they are preparing to fire on are Federals. Captain Griffin and Lieutenant Hazlett argue with Major Berry, but the chief of artillery soon pulls rank and keeps the 2 guns silent. By the time the 33rd Virginia's battle flag unfurls and Major Berry realizes they are Confederates, it is too late. The men of the 33rd Virginia level their muskets and fire a devastating point-blank volley at the cannons before surging forward. The guns are abandoned by the Federals, and the 33rd Virginia rushes over the howitzers and captures them. The capture of Griffin's 2-gun section marks the turning point of the battle.
Okay.
About 3 p.m., a legend is born atop Henry Hill as Brigadier General Bernard E. B. rides up to General Jackson in the smoky haze of the artillery duel. "General," he cries, "they are beating us back." Jackson calmly replies, "Then, sir, we'll give them the bayonets." B seems to regard the bayonet reply as an order, though he and Jackson hold equal rank and seniority, so he rides back to his shattered brigade to rally the men. The confusion is pervasive. A mere captain commands the 4th Alabama now, yet no one can find him at that moment. Disoriented, B does not even recognize some of his own men at first as he gallops towards them while they wander about the field in the smoky haze.
Okay.
Riding out to Captains Richard Clark and Porter King, B calls out, "What regiment is this?" One of the 2 officers, their faces tired and blackened from the gunpowder, replies, "Why, General, do you not recognize your own men? This is what is left of the 4th Alabama." B supposedly cries out, "Come with me!" It begins to lead the tiny shattered force of Alabamians up Henry Hill. After reaching the summit, the Confederate brigadier looks to his men, points toward Brigadier General Jackson, and shouts the now famous words, "Look, there stands Jackson like a stone wall. Let us determine to die here today and we will conquer. Rally behind the Virginians!" No one truly knows what B said at that fateful moment on Henry Hill, as he would later be mortally wounded within the next hour and die the following morning. The sources vary as to the moment and what B's quote actually is. However, regardless of what Bernard E. B truly says that afternoon is in attempting to rally his forces, the fact remains that from that day onward, Thomas Jonathan Jackson and his brigade of Virginians would forever keep the immortal nickname of Stonewall. B's words of encouragement to his troops does the trick, as the 4th Alabama remnants form into a rugged battle line behind the 4th Virginia at roughly 3 p.m. Around this time, General B is wounded in the stomach by a Federal artillery shell, causing considerable pain to the brigadier. Bernard E. B. Jr. would die the next morning, leaving the question as to the vague story about his words regarding Stonewall Jackson unanswered. At the same time General B rallies his troops from his brigade, Colonel Francis S. Bartow is also rallying his own shattered 2nd Brigade. With less than 400 men remaining in his command, Bartow asks General Beauregard, "What shall now be done? Tell me, and if human effects can avail, I will do it."
Okay.
Beauregard raises his sword and points it towards the stone bridge and the Federal batteries positioned along the banks of Bull Run. The little Creole shouts, "That battery should be silenced." And so, Bartow rides out to gather the remainder of the 7th Georgia and to launch another attack. Bartow's horse is shot from under him, and a bullet wounds him slightly. Ignoring the painful wound, Bartow begins waving his hat in the air, yelling, "Boys, follow me!" to the 7th Georgia. Just then, another bullet pierces Bartow's chest, fatally lodging itself in his heart. Several soldiers gather around the dying colonel as he simply states, "Boys, they have killed me, but never give up the field." Francis S. Bartow falls to the grass.
What words, what great words.
And dies in the arms of Lieutenant Colonel Lucius Gartrell, the 8th Georgia's commander. He has just become the 1st Brigade commander of the Confederate Army to be killed in action during the Civil War. About 3:15 p.m., the 14th Brooklyn launches an attack on the 33rd Virginia to recapture Griffin's 2-gun section. The charge by the Brooklyn Zouaves is so well organized and deadly when it is carried out that the Virginians are forced to retreat, exposing the 2nd Virginia to musket fire by the Federal troops. The 2nd Virginia's commander, Colonel James W. Allen, attempts to refuse a few companies to his left flank, but in a frenzied panic, his men rush to the rear of the 33rd Virginia. Now the New Yorkers turn their focus to the Confederate artillery guns. The small arms fire from the 14th Brooklyn rips straight into the artillerymen and threatens to turn Jackson's entire line and force it back. However, the New Yorkers do not spot Confederate reinforcements forming up on the reverse slope of Henry Hill. General Jackson calmly and coolly orders
this battle's so back and forth.
The 4th and 27th Virginia to wheel left and face the enemy, and then calls out to them, "Reserve your fire until they come within 50 yards, and then fire, and give them the bayonet, and when you charge, yell like furies." The Virginians carry out their orders with deadly precision, delivering a hail of musket fire into the 14th Brooklyn. They then fix bayonets and charge the enemy ranks, giving off an ear-piercing shriek that would become the first use of the infamous rebel yell. The 14th Brooklyn is pushed back across the Manassas-Sully Road at close to 3:30 p.m. The 6th North Carolina under Colonel Charles F. Fisher on the rebel left flank spots a handful of men from the 14th Brooklyn defending Griffin's guns and charges their position with fixed bayonets, capturing the pieces at 3:30. However, the deadly volleys and sporadic fire from the Union soldiers concealed in the woods beyond the road forces the North Carolinians back, their effort to recapture the guns in vain. During the intense exchange of musketry, Colonel Fisher is killed, and the 6th North Carolina falls back to its original positions.
So many people have died this battle as well.
After sustaining heavy casualties. After defeating the 14th Brooklyn, the 4th and 27th Virginia attacks Ricketts Battery, which is unable to pull its guns to safety after losing so many horses. However, the 3 remaining pieces from Griffin's battery on the left of the Union line do manage to limber up their pieces and proceed down the slope of the Henry Hill to safety. The Virginians now begin to hold the position around the Henry House. The 1st Michigan from Colonel Orlando B. Wilcox's 2nd Brigade in Heintzelman's 3rd Division is ordered to retake the lost batteries. The Michigan troops get into hand-to-hand combat with the Virginians. After several minutes of bloody melee action, the 1st Michigan is unable to drive off the rebel line, and they are forced to withdraw from Henry Hill at 3:45 after sustaining heavy casualties. Further to the south, a collection of scattered men from the 1st Minnesota, 11th New York, and 14th Brooklyn again attempt to recapture Griffin's remaining 2 guns, but heavy artillery and small arms fire from the Confederate lines on Henry Hill drives them back at 3:45 as well. Jackson's Virginians are unable to maintain hold over the cannons for long, as the 5th and 11th Massachusetts from Colonel William B. Franklin's 1st Brigade of Heintzelman's division attack the guns and drive the Confederates away, recapturing the 2 cannons for the 3rd time that afternoon. Unfortunately for the New Englanders, at the same time they recapture the guns, Brigadier General Beauregard, seeing the position and realizing its importance, gathers Hampton's Legion in the 5th Virginia and personally leads them into the fray to recapture Griffin's guns. By this point, General Jackson's brigade of Virginians has become increasingly mixed up and disorganized. To restore order to his ranks, Jackson pulls back his brigade, while Colonel Nathan Evans also reforms part of his 7th Demi Brigade nearby. The fight for Griffin's guns will continue for the next hour.
Shit, for a whole hour. The day is ours. The day is ours.
Just before 4 p.m., a mass collection of soldiers from both sides begin to descend on Griffin's guns. But ultimately, the Confederates are victorious in driving back the Union forces and capturing the 2 cannons. The actions around Griffin's section by Southerners gives an opening for the Confederate artillery to begin withdrawing from Henry Hill to a safe distance, getting out of the fight in order to refill their limbers and caissons and rest up. At 4 p.m., Colonel William Tecumseh Sherman's 3rd Brigade of Tyler's 1st Division moves up the Warrenton Turnpike intersection to prepare its ordered attack on Henry House Hill. However, instead of ordering his entire brigade to attack the hill in a concentrated and coordinated effort, Sherman instead sends his regiments into the fray piecemeal, first dispatching the 13th New York, commanded by Colonel Isaac F. Quimby, up the slopes of the hill just after 4 o'clock. As the Yankee troops of the Rochester Regiment march up the hill and fire on Hampton's Legion, voices shouting through the thick gunpowder smoke yell that they are firing on friendly troops. In fact, this is a ruse by Hampton's legionnaires. But the variations of gray and blue in both sides' uniforms only adds to the confusion of the situation. The 13th New York holds its fire, and the Hampton Legion seizes the moment, leveling their muskets and delivering a concentrated volley into the men from Rochester. The ruse broken, the 13th New York returns fire, and the 2 sides settle down to exchange volleys before the New Yorkers finally begin to waver and fall back.
Why didn't he send more of his forces in at one point in time? I don't get it.
Colonel Sherman next sends the gray-uniformed 2nd Wisconsin to confront the soldiers of the 5th Virginia, who soon apply the same ruse as Hampton's Legion, yelling out that the Yankees are firing on friendlies. When the Virginians level their muskets and open fire at close range, the 2nd Wisconsin troops begin to panic and start descending down the slope of the hill. The gray uniforms make the Wisconsin men look like rebels to their fellow Union comrades, and a deadly crossfire ensues until officers of the 2nd Wisconsin are able to alert their federal regiments to cease firing on friendlies. Just after 4:15, Sherman orders his 3rd Regiment, the Scottish-American 79th New York State Militia, to attack the enemy lines. Hampton's men and the 5th Virginia perform the same ruse for a 3rd time, causing confusion and panic in the Scots ranks when the regiment across the field, perceived as friendlies, fired upon them. The 79th New York's commander, Colonel James Cameron, is shot and killed on the field near the Henry House, close to the position where Colonel Hampton is also wounded, causing the Scotsmen to waver and eventually break under such heavy fire. Like the other units in Sherman's brigade, 79th New York descends the field in defeat. Brigadier General McDowell rides onto the battlefield just after the retreat of the 79th New York, instilling a sense of courage and boosting the wavering morale in his army. He helps his officers organize another attack on Henry House Hill at about 4:30. For this attack, Sherman's last regiment at his disposal, the Irish-American 69th New York State Militia under Colonel Michael Corcoran, as well as the 38th New York of Wilcox's brigade in the 3rd Division, began preparations for an attack up the Henry Hill. Meanwhile, the conglomeration of Union troops to the south prepares to recapture Griffin's 2 lost cannon. A renewed attack by McDowell's forces succeed in pushing the Confederates off the guns. By 4:45 p.m., Henry House Hill is finally in Union hands. It would not last long. Although they have succeeded in capturing the hill, the battered federal troops are taken by surprise when fresh Confederate reinforcements begin to emerge on the hill from Colonel Philip St. George Cox's 5th Brigade to the southeast and Brigadier General Millage L. Byland's 1st Brigade from the south. These fresh rebel regiments, spearheaded by Colonel Eppa Hunton's 8th Virginia from Cox's brigade, rush Henry Hill and send Union troops into a full retreat close to 5 p.m. After Colonel Michael Corcoran,
they're not waiting, they're just going straight for it,
of the 69th New York is wounded and captured by the 8th Virginia, the Irishmen begin streaming off Henry Hill in a retreat. Captain Thomas F. Marr's Company K holds the line while the rest of the regiment flees, before they are too forced to retreat. Each time their Union regiments fall back from Henry House Hill, they jumble up the main Federal line as the fleeing attackers pass through. Sometimes men do not stop the command to regroup, but simply keep running in near panic. Colonel Heintzelman tries to stop them, but then he falls out of battle with a painful wound. Indeed, so many officers are falling that there is no one for some of the men to turn to, and so they simply wander back towards Sully Springs Ford, getting in the way of reinforcements still on the road, and spreading to them stories of the battle not going well for them. The final brigade to attack at this point in the afternoon is Colonel Oliver O. Howard's 3rd Brigade of Heintzelman's division. They have already marched 10 miles or more that day in the heat and gathering dust, all the time hearing the growing din of battle ahead of them. Then they encounter the stragglers, and meanwhile, Howard has not had the sense to allow his men to leave behind their heavy field packs. By the time they cross Sully Ford and approach the right of the Yankee battle line, perhaps a fourth of some of his regiments have dropped out from exhaustion. With most of his brigades now used up in his assaults on Henry House Hill, McDowell's last hope depends on Howard's exhausted brigade.
He's going to try again.
Just about 5 p.m., Colonel Howard comes up on the field and is told to go to the Union right flank on Chin Ridge. He puts his brigade in line, dresses the ranks, and then orders the first line forward. The fire from the Confederate line of Colonel Arnold Esley's 1st Maryland Battalion withers the Union soldiers from the 2nd Vermont and 3rd Maine.
Look at that.
Howard soon
What were they supposed to do against all that?
sends forward his second
Suicide.
line, comprised of the 4th and 5th Maine. It too is repulsed from the assault on Chin Ridge, and an alarming number of men run for the rear and panic until they get out of fire. Meanwhile, over on the Confederate right, Colonel Keyes too has been handily repulsed in a second attempt to attack Henry House Hill, with the result that both of the southern flanks are firmly secure. While the Federal line becomes increasingly shaky, more and more of the once distant Confederate brigades are being forwarded by Johnston. Bonham's regiments now come into line on the extreme left, and then at the most fortuitous possible moment, Bonham's
They need to get out.
men see yet more troops coming their way from the rear. Brigadier General Edmund Kirby Smith had literally just jumped off the train from the Shenandoah and was bringing his regiment straight to the most vital part of the line after a grueling 6-mile march from the depot. Along the way, Smith encounters Johnston, who only orders him to go where the fire is hottest. Smith rushes forward through the stragglers and wounded, and about 5 p.m. takes his place in line, just in time for Smith himself to fall from a wound before he actually gets into the fight. Elzey resumes command of his brigade then and takes it through a wood to emerge with a wonderful view of Howard's now exhausted Federals directly before him. At once he orders a charge. "Give it to them, boys!" he shouts. The rebels rush forward as the terrified and demoralized Federals withdraw before them. By the time Elzey finishes his charge, Howard and his men are nowhere to be seen. Just then, Brigadier General Jubal Anderson Early's brigade arrives from its original positions to reinforce Elzey's brigade. Beauregard rides up to congratulate Elzey, yet neither appreciates yet just what has happened. Howard's retreat signals the beginning of the breakup of McDowell's army. Together, Early and Elzey hit the exposed Federal right flank, while Stuart places his cavalry on their extreme left and joined in the push. The Yankees fall back before them almost without resistance, and when Early crests a small rise, he could see thousands of them fleeing in panic beyond the Warrenton Turnpike. Men run in abject terror, yelling, "The enemy is upon us! We shall all be taken!"
How terrifying would that be?
Howard and other officers frantically and futilely ride along the lines and among the panicked groups trying to halt them. It is no use. Seeing what is happening, Beauregard seizes the moment and orders a charge by his whole battle line. Badly battered themselves, still, the Confederates find the courage and energy to rush forward, and almost everywhere the Federals fall back with little resistance. Now the impact of the stragglers begins to be felt as their numbers swell, first by Howard's panicked men, and then by others from the rest of the line. Panic infects the whole Federal army in what becomes mockingly known as the Great Skedaddle. At 5:30 p.m., the battle is ending as Federal troops begin retreating from Henry House Hill and Matthews Hill in a panicked rout. In their way are civilians from Washington who are picnicked out in the fields beyond the battle. They had arrived expecting to watch a decisive Union victory, but now are joining in the frenzied panic, their buggies and horse carriages only adding to the congestion on the packed roads.
I said it with Jack when we watched the oversimplified version. Like, it's still hard for me to fathom that there were sane people doing that. And like, in this case, your side lost. What's going to happen to you? Like, it adds to the panic as well. It breaks my mind, honestly.
Narrow bridges and fords. Troops are streaming rearward, and McDowell's army in northeastern Virginia is falling apart. Confederate battle flags proudly wave over Ricketts and Griffin's captured guns on Henry House Hill as surrounded Union forces and panicked civilians stream across Bull Run in droves and frenzied mobs. The Great Skedaddle doesn't end there either, with some Union troops running all the way back to Washington, 30 miles away. All sense of order and discipline within the Union Army is gone.
Wow.
By 6 p.m., General Beauregard has called off his pursuit of McDowell's beaten army. His forces are just as equally exhausted and shaken after 12 hours of battle. The Battle of Bull Run, or Battle of Manassas as it is known in the South, is over. At the time, it is the bloodiest battle in American history, with over 3,000 casualties littering the field at the end of the day. What many
only 30. There were still 13 Confederates captured, which was interesting.
had believed would be the decisive battle to quickly end the war now proved to only serve as the beginning of the conflict.
That's crazy.
Americans now have finally awoken to the fact that this will be a long, bloody war.
And I guess that there is that episode of WarHawk. I'm really enjoying this. Very long, but very informative. Definitely a watch, worth a watch. If you haven't already, head over to WarHawk's page. Links in the description box down below. If you enjoyed my reaction, looking forward to all future reactions. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will catch you in the next video.